I've been chatting with Stephen about bringing back culture workers.
Over the last few weeks, some information has started to trickle through about the 3.5 Fornax update, and one of which is the return of culture workers. What are culture workers? What do they do, and what do they work at? Well, there's a special building that you may or may not have built recently, and it is quite useful. It is, of course, the monument. Now, the monument generates a certain amount of unity, and for every single ascension perk that you have, it generates more unity as you go forward, and as you upgrade the building, it will generate more unity over time. The upgrades for as such are the heritage site and the hyper comms form. And overall, these buildings are kind of nice, especially considering the changes that came in the 3.3 update, where a lot of the functionality of influence was thrown out in the favor of unity, such as the hiring of leaders, which previously also went with energy, but that's a whole different story altogether. Still, though, it does mean that there may or may not be enough sources of unity in the game, which is interesting, but the developers themselves thought, you know what, if we are working on Fornax, but let's do some experiments with this. What can we do to make this particular building more interesting? Plus unity, plus 5% from workers, and just a single point of unity per building. It's not really all that interesting. What can we do to change this? Well, in the most recent dev diary for 3.5 Fornax, some of the holiday research has come forward. As you can see in this particular image, 2 additional worker jobs have been added to this structure. They're called culture workers. They were in the game in the past, but they are now back with a vengeance. They turn consumer goods into unity, which is relatively straightforward. And on top of that, this case also generate worker happiness, pop upkeep, and governing ethics attraction. Now, those 3 modifiers by themselves are rather strange because you wouldn't really expect these to pop up. Now, it actually goes a little bit deeper than this because these modifiers change depending on what kind of ethics your empire is running. For instance, in this particular case, my empire is a militarist, materialist empire. In this particular scenario, this empire would be using something very different. Whereas previously there would be pop happiness attached to it, well, that is actually attached to a different type of empire. Those are attached to xenophobes. Yes, this building, the monument, is going to change based on the type of empire that you have, and this brings in all sorts of interesting scenarios. Let me walk you through the gauntlet here. Materialists can get +2 amenities per planet. Now, there is a couple of interesting things that can go on here. If you have a fanatic version of a certain ethic, you will get a higher bonus out of it. How far this goes is not very clear. Final numbers aren't final. But still, having +2 amenities per planet per building, you can only build 1, and it's also not clear if this is per worker or for the building output itself. But having 2 additional amenities right off the get-go may not seem like a lot, but it can really impact pop happiness, and in addition to that, you may not have to build a holo theater. And that right there brings in all sorts of interesting scenarios, because you could potentially be looking at a situation where holo theaters are no longer needed, because they got their entertainment jobs and they generate amenities, sure, +20, etc. But maybe gene labs are more interesting in this particular scenario. Now, there's also a discussion whether or not some of these bonuses are applicable per a planet or empire. This materialist example is per planet, but this opens up all sorts of very interesting meta things. Spiritualists, in addition, they will reduce amenity usage per planet. Now, materialists and spiritualists cannot be used together because of opposites, etc., but still, a 2.5 amenity usage reduction on a planet is huge, especially in the late game. The +2 amenities per planet for materialists is actually relatively weak, but they get all sorts of tech bonuses as well, so that kind of balances things out. Militarists will get additional naval capacity for their empire, and I would assume this is by pop. So if you have, say, 6 pops working, then all of a sudden you're looking at a situation where you could go ahead and build an additional ship for 1 naval power for every single pop that's working there. Now, this may not seem like a lot, but in the early game, having, say, 3 planets with 6 additional corvettes that you can upkeep for free without going over your cap or having to invest into any other things can be very interesting, especially if you all of a sudden have the ability to focus on other things and put your resources in a different basket. All of a sudden you have a far more flexible military. I like this. I like this sort of very specific change. Pacifists will get 2.5% trade value from lifestyle. Now, lifestyle has, of course, to do with the rights that they have. So I believe that's under living standards. They can change that. Not 100% sure if that is completely the case, but trade value is attached to that. It could also have to do with the trade policy, etc., with the consumer benefits. But who knows? Egalitarians will have a 2.5% reduction in housing usage. Now, if you're running, say, for instance, a Ecumenopolis, this is not really all that interesting because Ecumenopoli are running crazy amounts of housing. But if you are on, say, a smaller planet where you're kind of in a housing crunch sometimes, 2.5% housing reduction can get pretty interesting. Is it great? No, not necessarily. Let's say that we want to have one of the species traits. We have a 2.5 reduction in there already, but it's essentially a free species trait on the planet, which can be pretty good. Authoritarian will get +3 Edict Fund. For those of you who do not know, edicts are being handled in a Edict Fund, which basically means that you could potentially play as, say, a Void Dweller and have a crazy amounts of habitats, each one of them having a monument with one of these buildings. And then you can get a crazy high Edict Fund and get all sorts of crazy abilities with that. And let's say that you want to run a nutritional plentitude and fortify the border as well as map the stars in combination. Yeah, you can do that because you will have a giant Edict Fund available that you can fund your empire with. But again, +3 may not seem like a lot, but if every single one of your planets is surrounded with, say, habitats and you only have, say, 5 systems, yeah, then that gets out of control quite quickly because you can run some crazy amounts of edicts. Xenophobes will increase citizen happiness by 2.5% at the moment. 2.5% may not seem like a lot, but happiness is happiness, and in happiness, of course, improves stability, which therefore improves productivity, and there are all sorts of knock-on effects. Finally, Xenophile will have a 2.5 pop upkeep reduction, which can be a pretty big boon, especially if you don't want to consume as many consumer goods or food, etc. So let's say you have an empire with a very large amount of planets, even if per planet it's 2.5% reduced over, say, 200, 300 pops. That's still 10 to 15-ish consumer goods. Again, it may not feel like a lot, but it's small changes that can really change things over. So yeah, these are the sort of things that the developers are currently playing around with. And as the thread run, we also already had a couple of changes. The list that I've talked about so far hasn't necessarily been a complete list of things. Things will change over time, and as 3.5 Fornax is still on the horizon, things are going to change. But what do you think? This is a pretty interesting change. It's very granular, but do you feel it's going to be worthwhile to attach culture workers to your buildings? Personally, when it comes to materialist, I would just unemploy them immediately. Like, 2 amenities for a building, it's not all that great. But for some of the other ones, militarist, naval capacity, hell yeah, let's do that. Egalitarian, actually authoritarian, the Edict Fund, yeah, let's keep on rolling. That's the good stuff right there. So having the ability to min-max your planets a little bit more is really, really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to see how this is going to change in the future and how people are going to manage their empire. For instance, let's take a look here. This place, yeah, it doesn't need that many clerks, right? No, it doesn't. But still, you know, managing your population could become a lot more interesting with this change. Still, though, right now, you can still only build 1 monument on your planet. Previously, before 3.3, you could build as many as you want. But this is now, you know, it's going to stay around. So what do you think? Do you like this change? Do you like the bonuses, the passive bonuses that you can get just by picking certain ethics? Ethics becoming more important within the game? Who knows? Who knows? Looking forward to what you think about this. Leave a comment below. Interesting to open up this discussion. I will leave the link to the Dev Diary in the description below as well. Thank you so much for watching. This has been a Dev Diary update on 3.5. Fornax culture workers are back. If this is going to be their final form, we do not know. They may evolve a little bit more. We will see. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take good care of yourselves. Thank you to my patrons, and take good care of yourselves as well as each other.